I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. Our guest today is Chief William Pittman of the Nantucket Police Department.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Welcome. Thank you. There are a lot of things we could talk about.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I would like to focus on today, because it was in the paper and more importantly was sort of the scuttlebutt on what some people call social media. I tend to call gossip media.
Yeah.
And that is the drug situation on Nantucket. The incident that took place on the Mattocket Road a couple of weeks ago was, by the estimation of the community, and subsequently I think confirmed by someone in the police department at least, believed to have been drug related.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody pointed out, this is the first gun exercise of this sort on the island in more than 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in the drug scene on Nantucket?
Well, it's really no different than the drug scene anywhere else in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Each community, based on its demographics, has a certain level of drug activity that may be more intensive than in other communities, for instance. But we're seeing a change in the types of drugs and the impact of that in society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
What we've been seeing over the last few years is a real increase in the abuse of prescription type drugs, the Oxycontins,
Mm-hmm.
the opiates, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And some people who are abusers think it's safer for them because they know what's in these products. They come from pharmacies and things like that. Unlike in the past, where the heroin and things like that you never knew what was in that drug, what it was cut with, what added ingredients, and sometimes they were toxic and sometimes they weren't. So we're seeing the problems that come with that, and Nantucket is experiencing our share of problems, certainly. But you can just read the papers from even the Cape, and you'll notice the Cape has its share, if not even more.
One would think because we are isolated, then it might be easier to put some kind of crimp in the flow of drugs to Nantucket.
Yeah.
Why is it not?
Well, because of the Constitution, basically. People have a right to travel unimpeded and free, and we have to have probable cause or reasonable suspicion before we can interdict the drugs. We do interdict a lot of drugs, and there's basically only a limited number of ways they can get here. People bring them in on their person, they bring them in their vehicles, they're on the boat, they're on the plane, or they bring them in by the mail. That way, and we do some interdiction, have some success with that, but even that has constitutional protections. We can't have a drug dog sniffing every piece of mail, that kind of thing.
Do you still have a drug dog?
Yes, we do.
And the other dog, I know, unfortunately had to be let
go.
Yeah. But you still have a drug dog. How do you use the drug dog?
Various ways. He's assigned to the day shift. We do just that. We use some sometimes for packages if we're made aware of, or we develop a case that we believe there may be some drugs in mail or parcel post or something. We'll get a warrant and we'll use the dog to sniff the package to see if it's in fact there. Sometimes you see him at the airport going through the luggage rack. Sometimes you see him at the ferry docks. And we use them, in the school. We use them a lot of different places, traffic stops, search warrants on homes, things like that.
If you had budget availability, would you have more dogs?
I'd have one more. Yeah, they're quite expensive. The expensive part is the training.
Right.
Getting you spend $5,000 to $10,000 just for the dog, and then you spend another $30,000 or $40,000 in the transportation, getting the officer back and forth to the mainland for the training, the cost of the training, and everything else. So it would be good to have one on a night shift, but that's quite a big chunk right there.
What impact does the drug usage have on the community? How does it show up in terms of your perspective, the police department's perspective on what's going on?
It has an impact in a lot of different ways. Many of it doesn't come to our attention. Most employers on the island are impacted by drug abuse on the island. The employees that they have, their level of productivity, their alertness, their attention to detail is oftentimes impacted by drugs. We have a fairly large transient population here, and because of the building trades that and other areas, sometimes in the seasonal work and things. Many of those folks bring their drug problem with them. One of the reasons they don't have stable work, maybe in their own communities, might be because their inability to pay attention to the job like they would if they weren't abusing drugs. So they bounce around, and they ultimately, a lot of them end up here. And what happens is you start to see decrease in productivity as the drug abuse increases with them, their ability to deal with it. We may even see them turn to crime, engage in things, theft, domestic abuses, things like that. So I would say we could safely say about 75% of the crime we have on the island is probably in some way, shape, or form related to drug or alcohol abuse.
Is the same true of domestic abuse?
That one's a tough one. I'm not going to deny I've always been a believer that I think people do things when they've been drinking that they would think twice about doing if they hadn't been drinking. But I really do believe in the theory that if somebody's an abuser, they have it in them to abuse. They don't, it's not just the drug or the alcohol that leads them that way. So I do think it has an impact. I think it's certainly got to be part of the solution, but we can't just blame alcohol for that. And domestic abuse is probably one of our number one reasons people get arrested on Nantucket.
Really?
Here. So every day I get a report every morning, 8 a.m. sharp, that lists every incident we've had in the past 24 hours. There isn't virtually every day there's either an OUI or a domestic battery arrest listed on that report. The other ones are far and few between.
Is there is it parallel to what a community of similar size would see in elsewhere?
Yeah, our numbers are fairly consistent with that. I think we have a higher number of unreported domestic abuses here. Quite frankly, I base that on several things. In part, it's a good thing because we work with a Safe Place as an organization very closely to try to deal with the violence. Right. And they're able to deal with a lot of things that wouldn't be appropriate for the police, or there's no need really for the police to get involved in. And a Safe Place has been seeing a skyrocketing number of clients coming in.
We had Kat Greeter on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and we haven't been seeing the same thing. And the reason for that is because a Safe Place is able to provide the needed services, and we work with them to determine whether prosecution is or is not appropriate or possible. We don't want to abuse the victim again unless there's going to be a successful outcome to this. And so, it's a good thing, but I think it's probably one of Nantucket's number one underreported crimes here.
Back to drug use. What is going to be the impact of quote, the legalization of marijuana?
Well, I was not in favor of that. Quite honestly, I think I'm not opposed to the concept of medical marijuana. If the experts say there's a legitimate need for that, a reason for that, I have to go by what the experts say. What I don't think the whole thing was well thought out in an implementation process. If it is, in fact, a valid and legitimate drugs, why aren't the pharmaceutical companies involved in the distribution of this? Why are we depending on a homegrown stash in somebody's basement?
Doesn't some of it have to do with the fact that it's the marijuana legalization efforts are at the state level, whereas at the federal level, that's
got a lot to do with it. But there again, if it's a legitimate purpose, maybe that's where the activity ought to be directed. We need to change the federal law to allow this. I see
Good
no
luck.
Well, if it's legitimate,
I
it should
understand.
change.
I'm being cynical.
No, and
sorry.
I agree. Good luck, but it puts a lot of people in very tough position, having to be against federal law, yet having it not be against state law.
I know there was some talk of a application for, I guess they're called dispensaries or something of that
Dispensaries.
sort. Has that an application actually been submitted?
I've not seen any applications. I've heard that there's been at least 4 or 5 inquiries from people who are interested in opening dispensaries. My main concern is going to be the proximity to schools and the proximity to homes, residences, because where you got homes, you got children. I hope the town is able to somehow direct these things to an appropriate area in the community where, it's not going to be exposed, the children aren't going to be exposed to it unnecessarily, and we can legitimately police it.
There's hardly any place there where there aren't children. And
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge. I just think there's better ways of doing it. If somebody needs medical marijuana, I think there's have a statewide warehouse and distribution system, and I think there's some talk at the state level about maybe doing that to eliminate the big problem I have with it is the local dispensary issue.
But still, somebody would have to have a prescription, would they not?
And there are people in Nantucket that already have prescriptions. So, yeah.